Hi everyone! This is for educational use only. Our group is allowing our instructor, Miss Ruland Arditnis, to use these as educational materials.
Human trafficking, a grave violation of human rights, exploits vulnerable individuals for profit, often through forced labor, sexual exploitation, or other forms of coercion. This heinous crime thrives on the intersection of poverty, inequality, and weak governance, particularly impacting migrants who are often targeted due to their precarious legal status and limited access to resources. Addressing human trafficking requires a multifaceted approach that tackles the root causes of vulnerability, strengthens border security, and enhances international cooperation to protect the fundamental rights of all individuals, regardless of their migration status.
Trafficking in persons is often described as the new form of slavery for the 21st century. Very much like in the past, when human beings were forced to work for free on plantations, in mines, or as domestic workers, also today, millions of people are forced into various forms of exploitation. By coercing people into a situation that they cannot escape, trafficking deprives human beings of their dignity and rights. According to the latest ILO estimates, more than 40 million people are victims of modern slavery, including human trafficking, in all continents of the world. While women and girls are disproportionately affected, boys and men are also increasingly detected as victims. What can be done to reverse these trends? Today, there are laws, mechanisms and tools that are used to counter trafficking locally, regionally and globally. International organizations, governments, NGOs, the private sector, and trade unions are all involved in such efforts at different levels, from prevention to protection, from research to prosecution. Some strategies may succeed, others may fail, but one thing is clear: human trafficking must be tackled with a global, all-encompassing approach. Do you want to know how? The Global Campus of Human Rights is offering an online course on counter-trafficking in Southeast Asia.
Good day everyone, especially to our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardines. We are the Group 1 and our topic is all about human trafficking and human rights in migration. At the end of the lesson, the student will be able to describe the relationship between human trafficking and human rights, especially in the context of migration. Second, describe the impact of human trafficking on individual, societies, and global migration pattern. What is human trafficking? Human trafficking, the illegal trade of human beings for the purposes of exploitation, it involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor, sexual services, or other form of exploitation from individuals. Victims of human trafficking can be men, women, or children, and they may be trafficked for various purposes, including what is human trafficking.
So, we have here 5 examples of human trafficking. Number 1, forced labor. Victims are made to work in industries like agriculture, construction, factories, or domestic work without proper compensation or freedom. Number 2, sexual exploitation. Victims are coerced into prostitution or other forms of sexual exploitation, like blackmail. Blackmail is someone who threatens to tell a harmful secret about another person in order to try to force them to do something. They might use an image or video you've shared, your sexuality or gender identity, or anything else you're keeping secret. Whatever someone is using against you is a form of blackmailing. Number 3, organ trafficking. Victims may be trafficked for the illegal removal and sale of their organs. Number 4, forced criminality. Victims are forced to commit crimes such as drug trafficking or theft. Traffickers often target vulnerable populations, including migrants, individuals in poverty, or those in unstable situations. Human trafficking is a severe violation of human rights and is considered a form of modern-day slavery. It is illegal under international law and many national laws around the world.
Human trafficking consists of three critical elements, commonly referred to the act, means, and purpose framework. When we say act, this refers to what is done to the victim. It includes the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of person. These actions are aimed to get in control of individual obtained through deception, while means is refers to how the trafficking is accomplished. It involves the use of threat, force, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power, or exploitation of vulnerability. In some cases, traffickers manipulate the victim's circumstances, such as poverty or lack of education, to interrupt them. Lastly, purpose. This is the reason why trafficking across the most common purpose or exploitation is various forms, including sexual exploitation, forced labor, domestic servitude, organ harvesting, and even forced criminality or child soldier. These three elements highlight that trafficking is not just about transportation, but also involves manipulation and exploitation.
So, what is the current status of human trafficking in the Philippines? As of 2024, human trafficking remains a critical issue in the Philippines, with the country maintaining its tier and status in the U.S. Trafficking in Person TIP report from the 9th consecutive year. This ranking acknowledges the government's substantial effort to combat trafficking, including making annual progress in addressing the problem, enforcing anti-trafficking law, and supporting victims. Despite this effort, challenges persist, including the involvement of some corrupt officials in trafficking activities. The Philippines face various forms of human trafficking, including forced labor, sex trafficking, and online sexual exploitation of children, or OSEC, which is particularly prevalent due to the rise of internet use. Vulnerable groups including women, children, and migrant workers. The government collaborates with organizations like the International Justice Mission, or IGM, to address this crime and has successfully prosecuted hundreds of traffickers. The one notable achievement is the work of Samson Innocent Jr., who has played a key role on protecting children from sexual exploitation, contributing the hundreds of convictions and the rescue of many victims. While the government has made a significant stride, ongoing vigilance is required to protect vulnerable populations from trafficking in both domestic and international settings.
Vulnerability of migrants. Migrants, especially those who are undocumented or fleeing conflict, poverty, or natural disaster, are more likely to fall victim to human trafficking. They will be lured by traffickers with false promise of employment or safe passage, only to exploit it through forced labor, sexual exploitation, or other forms of abuse. Migrants are particularly susceptible. They lack legal protection or support system in the destination country. Second is smuggling versus trafficking. Migrants are often rely on smuggler to help them cross borders illegally, while smuggling involves a voluntary agreement between the smuggler and the migrants. It can sometimes turn into trafficking when migrants are deceived or forced into explosion after reaching their destination. This overlap between smuggling and trafficking is common, especially in conflict zone or among vulnerable population.
Economic and social pressures. Migration is often driven by economic pressures, such as unemployment or inadequate living conditions in a person's home country. These pressures can push individuals into dangerous situations where they are more likely to be trafficked. Traffickers exploit the desperation of migrants, offering them fake opportunities or jobs abroad, which eventually turn into trafficking situations. Next is exploitation in destination countries. Migrants who arrive in new countries without proper documentation or legal work permits are often at risk of exploitation by traffickers. This can happen in sectors like agriculture, construction, or domestic work where migrant labor is in demand. The lack of legal status makes it difficult for these migrants to seek help or escape exploitation. In summary, migration increases the risk of human trafficking, particularly for undocumented or vulnerable migrants. Policies that protect migrants' rights and provide safe migration pathways can help reduce trafficking risk.
Is understanding human rights in migration. Understanding human rights in migration involves looking at the rights of individuals who are crossing borders or are on the move. Regardless of the reason for migration, this includes refugees, asylum seekers, migrant workers, and others who leave their homes due to conflict, economic hardship, persecution, or environmental disasters. The goal is to ensure that, regardless of their status, these individuals have their basic rights respected and protected. Here are some key points in understanding human rights within the migration context. Number one is basic rights apply to all migrants. Second is protection from exploitation and abuse. The third one is right to seek asylum. Fourth is family unity and reunification. Fifth is access to justice and due process. The sixth is right to health and education. Seventh, decent work and labor rights. Eight, humanitarian assistance and support. 9. Avoiding criminalization of migration. 10. International cooperation and shared responsibility. And the last one is recognition of climate and environmental migration. Understanding this principle is essential to create migration policies that respect human dignity and ensure that all migrants, regardless of the status, have their rights recognized and protected.
Human trafficking has significant adverse effects on globalization, undermining its negative aspects. Some of the key ways in which human trafficking affects globalization include undermining global labor markets. Human trafficking fuels exploitative labor practices, often leading to illegal and unethical labor conditions. As globalization encourages the free movement of goods and labor across borders, trafficking disrupts legitimate labor markets by creating unfair competition. Businesses that rely on trafficked individuals for cheap labor can offer goods and services at artificially low prices, disadvantaging businesses that comply with labor laws and international standards. This drives a race to the bottom in terms of wages and working conditions, weakening labor protection globally. Second one is economic instability. Human trafficking distorts economic development by perpetuating inequality and preventing marginalized groups from benefiting from opportunities globalization provides. It deprives economies of skilled workers and weakens the potential of human capital by exploiting individuals in low wages, high-risk jobs. Victims of human trafficking often strive of their rights and economic opportunities, cannot contribute meaningfully to their host or home economies. This can exacerbate poverty and inequality, particularly in developing countries, which are often most vulnerable to both globalization's pressure and trafficking.
So, the global security threat, trafficking networks often overlap with organized crime, contributing to broader global security threats. Transnational trafficking operations exploit porous borders and weak regulatory frameworks, enabling other illegal activities like drug smuggling, arms trafficking, and money laundering. These illegal activities destabilize nations, particularly in regions already affected by conflict or weak governance, further complicating efforts to promote stable economic and political globalization. Violation of human rights. So, the violation of human rights is one of the fundamental principles of globalization is the promotion of human rights and international cooperation. Human trafficking, however, violates the principles by subjecting victims to exploitation, violence, and abuse. It represents a failure in the international community's ability to enforce human rights standards and laws that protect vulnerable populations. This undermines global cooperation efforts as countries fail to fully implement international conventions aimed at combating trafficking. Damage to global supply chains. So the damage to global supply chains is how globalization has led to complex, interconnected supply chains that span continents. Human trafficking, especially in sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, and construction, tends these supply chains. Companies that are linked to trafficking through their labor practices or suppliers face reputational damage, loss of consumer trust, and legal consequences. This disrupts the flow of trade, causes economic losses, and hinders the smooth operational of global markets.